So picking up on situational negotiation of identity, I think this is very important. It comes out of Ohinjandaro's idea around different ethnic groups coming into kind of America or different locations and having to kind of pick their identity, right? Like, so maybe at home, you're very much identify or relate to kind of your culture group. And then when you go out into the workforce or the broader subculture or macro culture, you're having to like become a different person in a way. But really what it is that it's an overall spectrum of identity, right? And we all have this. We all kind of operate on the spectrum of self. And if these are the parameters of our self, inside that we operate on different roles and pieces of identity. In fact, at home, I don't have the same identity as I do at work, right? Or as I do in my public life or with my friends. I basically take on different roles and have different versions of status in all of those different locations. Now, am I being two-faced or not true to myself? No, the spectrum of self is large. The problem is that we do have these things in America where, like in middle school, we start to call people two-faced when they start to hang out with other people aside from you. It's that in-group, out-group idea. But in reality, people are just trying to figure out who their kind of self is and how their identity spectrum is forming. This is key, right? And I use the example a lot of times is, you behave a certain way at home or with friends, but then when you go into a job interview, do you behave the same way that you do in the job interview that you do with your friends? And is that being two-faced? No, that's basically adapting to the environment. And that's what situational negotiation of identity is adapting yourself in a new role and place in terms of status. And because when you go into a job interview, your status is as much as that piece of paper or that resume that you put out. Other than that, you have no status within that workplace that you're trying to kind of gain access to. So situational negotiation of identity, I think, is very, very valuable, especially when we start to analyze people. A lot of times people in our own culture kind of behave certain ways and we think, man, that was like, what's going on, right? Like, so let's say that you're in the checkout line at a grocery store and the checker or the bagger is just, is not being kind. It's just like rude. This happens, but really what we should be asking ourselves is, what happened to them in today or the last week, right? A lot of times we have things happen to us in our personal lives, right? Like it could be a death in the family, divorce, some of those things that are emotionally taxing. And really, it's really hard to keep that situational negotiation of identity separated. So when people and myself, when we go to work, we're trying to still maintain this composure of this self at work, right? This identity at work. However, the other parts of ourself are still us, so we're still going to be affected by those things in that situation. So the next time you're exposed to somebody who's having a bad day and basically maybe not being a nice person, or somebody's honking at you, or I always have to catch myself and stop the American judgment piece and ask myself, you know what? They could have something terrible be going on in their life right now, and I have no clue. And I have no place in passing judgment because I need to be culturally relative as well. But also, that situational negotiation of identity piece is key. It's a key component to analyzing individuals. There could be kind of a mixing in of your other self, right? Your home life or your family life or your friend life. There could be some traumatic stuff going on there, and you're not going to be able to truly keep those separated at all times, right? Multiculturalism is just that. It's multiple cultures in the same location. America prides itself on that. Nationalism and imagined communities, again, Benedict Anderson, when we did the symbol kind of exercise with you guys, this has a huge component, right? Nationalism is the idea that your nation is the most important. You speak a common language. You have common symbols. Everybody else, in-group, out-group, right? So let's say that we have an in-group microculture, in-group subculture. A subculture could even be that you're a Raider or a 49er fan or a LA Ram fan. But really, nationalism comes into this kind of in-group, out-group idea as well, right? Like where America is my in-group and everybody else is an out-group and we don't trust them. And again, this could get into some oxytocin things as well without discussion, right? If you do the judgment and you do ethnocentrism and you fall into that and you don't have those components like band and egalitarian societies did, where they included other groups into the conversation in terms of ceremonies, we can find ourselves in the same kind of or similar conflicts that we have throughout kind of this civilized experiment. Ethnicity, gender, and caste. Again, ethnicity tends to be kind of a cultural catch-all. I like the word culture better than ethnicity. However, America uses kind of ethnic backgrounds. It's tough because a lot of times in America we blend ethnic with race. So I think that that's one of the tough kind of ideas, especially here. Like mestizaje, or the old word used to be mestizos, is mixed race ideas. And again, it shouldn't be mixed race, but this is kind of the definition they give. It should really be cultural blending, right? Because if we don't believe in race, then it's just basically genetic gene flow, and it has nothing to do with a race. And then once you blend a race, then are you a new race? Like, it gets into some complicated stuff that the whole race thing can't really work out. Mestizaje usually refers to European mixing with indigenous blood and our culture, right? Chinese ethnicity. Let's see, what's the piece here? So I guess with Chinese ethnicity, there's a picture here. Again, what is that ethnic? See, the thing is, a lot of times we just say, oh, they're Chinese because they speak Chinese, right? It's a language component. However, there are a bunch of different ethnicities within China, and even China deals with some ethnic identity issues. There's a huge component in terms of a region on kind of their northwestern side of China, where they're a majority Muslim Chinese, and they're starting to regulate and discriminate towards them, and that has a lot to do with kind of the terrorism scares and stuff like that around Islamic kind of groups and whatnot. Ethnicity in America. This is a question for you guys in terms of, what does ethnicity look like in America? I know that it's on the checkoff sheet that I get every time, which is, what am I checking off? What culture group do I represent? And at some point, like, it's interesting. I think it has a lot to do with identity, but I think that the boxes are bad. I mean, if they put California on an ethnic kind of grouping sheet, I would be more inclined to click that group rather than other, because I'm not really seeing my identity in that kind of grouping, right? Human, if they put human, I'm there. It has a lot to do with identity, so that's a tough one. Gender and status issues. Remember, gender is not the same as sex and sexuality. Gender is kind of a behavior, right? I think America, again, is going through some reevaluation around gender and asking itself, do we want to participate in this binary structure of man, woman? Is it who has status, and are we going to elevate kind of third, fourth, fifth genders like the two spirits of the Native American tribes to a place of maybe revered or chiefdoms, just like the Nuwa here. And again, getting into kind of race as a way of identifying and pointing a finger at certain groups. This is a very simple, like, baseline in-group, out-group idea. And again, it's basically generalization, ethnocentrism. All of that is just wrapped in a bundle of unacceptance and unawareness of the human kind of experience and who we actually are, right? In fact, I had a student last night say, well, they were in my physical anthropology class, and they said, Mr. Griffin, so Africans in general from the African continent have longer femurs, right? So could we categorize them as kind of this grouping, and does their skeletal remains, in terms of like basically trying to go back to kind of this idea of race, and does it exist, And they said, well, don't they have longer femurs than everybody else? And I said, have you heard of the Mbuti pygmies that are in the African continent? And they said, no. And I said, they're pygmies. Their top height is, 3'7". So their femur bones are not going to be long. So generalizing groups of people in these categories is just, it doesn't work. It's a Western binary. We've been taught to do it to a certain degree, but it is just a way of saying, hey, those people over there, they are the problem. It's not me. Even though you might even have friends in that group of people, and then you kind of make exceptions, so you take them out. Once you make an exception, you can't have a generalization. It's not general anymore. So again, this gets into the ethnocentric cultural relativity. Also starts to move into some identity issues around ethnicity. But really, in anthropology, we're Klein. It's basically a human thing. We've migrated. The environment has impacts on us from being high up in the Andes and being barrel chested and darker because you're still kind of close to the equator and you get enough vitamin D. There's no, it's just one big giant experiment and experience and process of humanity, to be honest. And trying to label it and categorize it so that it makes sense for us is very, I'm not trying to degrade or put down children, but it's on that basic level, right? Where you're exposed to maybe a kid who's 3 or 4 and just learning language and trying to learn the binary structure that we're teaching them, and they ask questions like, so, mom or dad, why is that person darker than me, or why do they look that way? And then in that moment, we have a teaching kind of responsibility in my mind, right? Which is, well, actually, their ancestry came from kind of this different part of the world, and it's because they needed to reflect sun because they were getting exposed, and they didn't need to upload that much vitamin D and didn't want skin cancer. So there's a teaching moment there, and instead of saying, oh, because they're different or they're this group of people, which immediately starts this move towards in-group, out-group location. Again, anthropology is absolutely not into that. They are into analyzing different culture kind of areas and behaviors and groupings that way. But in terms of kind of grouping people in these ways, it doesn't really work out. So with that, just make sure that you guys do the midterm. I'm going to leave it untimed. It's going to be multiple choice. Do the best you guys can. And again, any questions, comments, or concerns, please email me.